My brother has always been the one people remembered. Not because he was louder than everyone else, though he was. Not because he had the sharpest mind in the room, though he'd be the first to tell you he did. It was more than that. He had this quality, this gravitational pull, where everything he said landed like it mattered, like it was worth writing down. Grown-ups leaned in when he talked. Teachers called my parents to say he was exceptional. Our relatives passed his name around at holiday tables the way they passed the gravy, freely, warmly, like sharing something good. I was 2 years younger. I was also there. That part people sometimes forgot. His name is Elliot. Mine is Willa. If you've never heard that name before, that's fine. Neither had most of the people in my family, it felt like, for the first 30 years of my life. Elliot went into finance, not just finance, investment banking, the kind where you work until 2 in the morning and wear it like a badge. He joined a firm straight out of his MBA program at Wharton, which my father announced at every family gathering from 2015 onward, sometimes twice in the same afternoon. Elliot made partner faster than most. He bought a condo in Philadelphia with floor-to-ceiling windows. He sent our parents a bottle of scotch every Christmas that cost more than my first car. I went into supply chain management, which, if you've ever tried to explain supply chain management to relatives at a holiday dinner, you know is essentially the same as saying nothing. Eyes glaze, heads nod politely. Someone changes the subject to Elliot. For a long time, I let that happen. I didn't do it out of weakness exactly. I did it because I understood something early. The people who needed to know what I did already knew. My colleagues knew. My clients knew. The companies I worked for knew. The rest, the aunts, the cousins, the family friends who asked, "So what do you do?" with that particular smile that meant they were really asking, "Are you doing as well as Elliot?" They didn't need to know. Their opinion wasn't part of my performance review. So I stayed quiet. I smiled. I said, logistics mostly, and let the conversation move on. What I didn't say, that by the time I was 29, I was the one restructuring distribution networks for companies that moved hundreds of millions of dollars in product every year. That I'd spent 2 years living out of a suitcase, flying between Detroit and Dallas and Denver, untangling supply chain disasters that had taken years to create. That at 31, I had taken a senior director role at a firm most people in my industry recognized immediately. That at 33, I was being recruited for a VP position that would have made Elliot's salary look modest. None of that came up at Thanksgiving. What came up at Thanksgiving, the year I turned 34, was that Elliot had just made a very smart investment. He'd put money into a logistics software startup, early stage pre-revenue, the kind of thing that either becomes something or disappears quietly in 18 months. He'd done his research, he said. He'd talked to people in the space. He understood the market. He said the word disruption 3 times in 4 minutes, and I watched my father nod along like a student taking notes. We were at my aunt's house in Delaware. The table was set for 14. There were 2 kinds of stuffing and an argument already brewing about whether the pie was store-bought. My grandmother, my mother's mother, 83 years old, 5 feet tall, with reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck and a way of looking at people that made you feel like she was reading your credit score, was sitting directly across from me. Her name is Harriet, but everyone calls her Hat. She has called everyone else's bluff for 60 years. She raised 4 kids, mostly alone after my grandfather died young, worked as a bookkeeper for 30 years, and retired with more savings than anyone in the family expected. Because she simply never spent money on things she considered foolish. She considered most things foolish. She was eating her green beans and listening to Elliot talk. I was eating my green beans and not talking. The thing is, Elliot said, leaning back in his chair with the comfort of a man who has been told he's right his whole life. Logistics is one of those industries that's just right for disruption right now. It's been running on old systems for decades. Nobody's really cracked it yet. I said. There's a startup I got in on early. I can't say the name yet, SEC stuff, but they're building a platform that's going to change how inventory forecasting works. Completely automated. Real-time data, predictive modeling, the works. Nobody in the industry is doing this yet. I took a sip of water. I mean, it's a complex space, he continued. Supply chain is not for everyone. It takes a specific kind of mind. You have to understand systems, flow, the way delays cascade. Most people don't have the patience for it. My cousin across the table asked him a question about the investment. He answered it at length. My uncle asked a follow-up. My father smiled the way he always smiled when Elliot was talking. The particular private smile of a man watching something he'd built doing exactly what it was supposed to do. I cut a piece of turkey. My grandmother set down her fork. She looked at Elliot. Then she looked at me. Then she looked back at Elliot. "This startup you invested in," she said. Her voice was the same as always. Quiet, unhurried, the voice of someone who had stopped performing patience decades ago and simply was patient. "What's their go-to-market strategy?" Elliot blinked. "Sorry?" "Their go-to-market strategy. How are they planning to reach their first enterprise clients? Cold sales? Channel partnerships? Are they going through existing logistics platforms or trying to displace them?" The table got a little quiet. Elliot looked at her the way people always looked at Hat when she said something they weren't expecting. Like he needed a moment to recalibrate. "I mean, they're still in early stages. They have some partnerships in development. Do they have a pilot customer yet?" "They're in conversations." Elliot. Hat picked up her fork again. "You just told this table that nobody in the industry is doing what this company does. I'm wondering how you know that." There was a pause. "I did my research," he said. "Sure." She nodded once. "Willa, what do you think?" The whole table turned to look at me. I had been quiet for so long that the attention felt almost physical, like a spotlight someone had swung in my direction by accident. My mother was watching me with an expression I'd seen before. That particular mix of hope and nervousness that meant she wanted me to be kind. "About the startup?" I asked. "About the space," Hat said. "About whether nobody's cracking it." I set down my fork. I thought about saying I don't really know that much about it. I thought about saying Elliot knows more about the investment side than I do. I thought about all the years of letting conversations move on. "Two of the companies I oversee are already running automated forecasting," I said. "One of them built their system in-house 3 years ago. The other one licensed a platform. There are at least 4 established players in that space right now with enterprise contracts. Some of them have been operating for 5, 6 years. The table was quiet. Elliot looked at me. "You oversee companies?" "I'm VP of operations at a supply chain consultancy. We manage the operational infrastructure for a portfolio of clients, mostly mid-market manufacturers and distributors." He said nothing for a moment. "Since when?" "About 8 months now. Before that, I was senior director at Harman Group for 3 years. I paused. "You came to my promotion dinner for the senior director role." "I remember that. You gave a toast." "I remember the toast. You said I'd finally found my lane." The table had gone the specific kind of quiet that happens when everyone is pretending to be very interested in their food. My uncle had found something urgent to do with his napkin. My aunt was looking at the centerpiece. Hat was looking at Elliot. "So," she said pleasantly, "the industry nobody's cracking. Will has been in it for about a decade." 11 years, I said. "And the thing nobody's doing yet with forecasting?" "Her clients have been doing it for 3 years," said my younger cousin from the end of the table. "She is 22 and has no patience for subtext." I feel like that was the point. Elliot put down his fork. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his face. Not embarrassment, exactly. Something more complicated than that. He'd been in finance long enough to know when he'd miss something. And he'd known me long enough to know that I'd let him miss it. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked, and his voice, for once, wasn't the voice of the person at the center of the room. It was quieter, genuinely confused. "I don't know," I said, which was honest. "I guess I figured you weren't asking." He looked at his plate. "That's fair." My mother reached over and touched my arm. My father was looking at the centerpiece now too, or perhaps at some middle distance that was easier to face. Had speared a green bean. "Well," she said, "now everyone's caught up." What I didn't expect was what happened after dinner. We were in the kitchen, me, Elliot, and a stack of dishes, and everyone else had drifted into the living room with their coffee. The house had that particular post-Thanksgiving feeling of too much food and too many feelings, the kind of evening where everything is slightly softer than usual. Elliot handed me a dish to dry. He did it without ceremony, the way siblings do. And for a moment we were just two people standing at a sink. Harmon Group, he said. I looked them up. When? Just now. In the bathroom. He almost smiled. They're good. They're very good. And you were senior director there. For 3 years. He handed me another dish. I didn't know. I know you didn't. I mean. He paused. Mom and Dad talk about you. They've talked about your job. I just didn't retain it. He winced slightly. Put it together. I didn't put it together. He was quiet for a moment. I've been talking about supply chain for the past year because of this investment, and I didn't once think to ask you about it. No, I said. You didn't. That's bad. It's not great. He handed me the last dish. We stood there for a moment in the quiet of the kitchen, with the sound of the football game coming from the other room and my aunt's dog clicking across the hardwood floor somewhere behind us. This startup, he said, the one I invested in. Yeah? Is it a bad investment? I thought about it honestly. I need to look at their actual product, but based on what you described, if they don't have a pilot customer yet and they're entering a space with established players, they have a harder path than they're probably telling you. That's what I was afraid you'd say. It might still work out. Early stage is unpredictable. But the pitch that nobody's doing this yet is wrong, and if that's the foundation of their market differentiation, I shrugged. I'd ask more questions. He nodded slowly. He looked like a person reassembling something. His understanding of the investment, maybe, or his understanding of me, or both at once. Can I ask you something? He said. Sure. At dinner, when you said I gave a toast at your promotion dinner and said you'd found your lane, he looked at me directly. Did that bother you at the time? I thought about the dinner. I thought about the restaurant we'd gone to, a nice one, a celebration. I thought about Elliot standing up with his glass and saying, warmly and with genuine affection, that he was glad I'd finally found something that suited me, like I'd been wandering. Like the years before that had been a search that had now, mercifully, ended. Yeah, I said. It did. Why didn't you say anything? Because it was my promotion dinner and I didn't want to make it about that. He was quiet. And because, I said, I've been not saying things for a long time. It gets easier. You stop noticing you're doing it. He absorbed that. I've been doing this for a long time, haven't I? He made a vague gesture. The assuming. You're very good at it, I said. And I meant it without particular cruelty. It was just the truth. He leaned against the counter. I want to know what you actually do, he said. Not the dinner party version. The real version. Will you tell me? So I told him. I told him about the Detroit distribution center I'd spent 4 months inside, tracking down the source of a bottleneck that had been costing a client $2 million a quarter. I told him about the night I drove across 3 counties in a rental car at 11 p.m. because a warehouse manager wouldn't pick up his phone and a shipment of medical supplies was sitting in the wrong facility. I told him about the negotiation I'd led with a carrier that had gone 6 hours and ended with a contract that saved one of my clients nearly $4 million annually. He listened the whole time, really listened. The way he listened when something had his full attention, which was a different thing from the half-listening he did when he thought he already knew the answer. When I finished, he said, "You're very good at this." Yes, I said. I am. He smiled. A real one. The smile I remembered from when we were kids and he wasn't performing anything, just being a person. I should have asked years ago. You should have, I agreed. I'm sorry, Willa, I know. We stood there for another moment. In the other room, someone shouted at the football game. My grandmother laughed at something. Her laugh, the same as it's always been, sudden and unguarded, like it surprises even her. "The startup," Elliot said finally. "Can I send you their materials? Just to look at?" "Yeah," I said. "Send them over. I'll pay you for your time." "You're my brother. You're a VP. Send them over," I said. "We'll figure it out." He sent them the following Monday. I spent 2 evenings going through the pitch deck, the product overview, the market analysis. It was, as I'd suspected, built on some assumptions that didn't hold up under scrutiny. The market sizing was generous, the competitive landscape was incomplete, and the go-to-market timeline was optimistic in a way that suggested the founders had never tried to close an enterprise contract before. I wrote up a memo, 4 pages, specific, honest. I sent it to Elliot with a note that said, "This doesn't mean it fails, but you should know what you're actually betting on." He called me the next morning. "This is incredibly helpful," he said. "My analyst doesn't know this space well enough to catch half of this. That's what happens when you invest in an industry without talking to anyone who works in it. I deserve that. You do." He laughed. I laughed. It was the first time we'd laughed together in, I didn't want to count how many years. "I'm going to have a conversation with the founders," he said. "Ask them to address these questions. If they can't," he paused, "well, then I'll know what I'm dealing with." "That sounds right." "Willa," he hesitated, "this thing you have, the way you see systems, the way you see how things connect. I've been in finance my whole career and I can model cash flows in my sleep, but I don't think the way you think." I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what he was getting at. "I've been telling people for years that finance is the serious work," he said. "The real work. I think I believed it. I think I needed to believe it." Another pause. "That was wrong." "Yes," I said. "It was. I'm working on it." "I know. My grandmother called me that Friday. She never texts, she finds it undignified. So she called and I answered, and she asked me how I was and whether I'd had enough to eat at Thanksgiving because she'd been worried about the portion size of the sweet potatoes. I told her I was fine. I told her the sweet potatoes were excellent. "I've been waiting," she said, "for someone to ask you a direct question at one of these dinners for about 6 years." "I know you have. You should have done it yourself, you know. You shouldn't have needed me to." "I know that too." She was quiet for a moment. I could hear her television in the background. She watches the evening news at a volume that suggests she's compensating for something, though she insists her hearing is perfect. "Your grandfather," she said, "was the smartest person I ever knew. And he never told anyone. He thought his work would speak for itself." She paused. "It did eventually, but it took longer than it needed to. And he spent a lot of years being underestimated by people who were much less capable than him and knew it. And it wore on him." I said nothing. "Don't do what he did," she said. "Let people know. Not to brag. Not like your brother with his." She made a sound of mild contempt. "His startup investments. But just let people know. It matters." "Okay, Hat. I mean it. I know you do. Good." She shifted to the question of whether I was eating enough protein, which is the way she ends most serious conversations, and we talked for another 10 minutes about nothing important. And when I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a while in the quiet. I thought about all the dinners, all the times I'd nodded and said logistics, mostly, and let the conversation move on. All the toasts I'd smiled through. All the questions nobody had thought to ask. I thought about my grandfather, who I barely remembered, just a tall, quiet man with careful hands, and the years it had taken for his work to speak for itself. And I thought that Hat was right. She's almost always right. It's one of the more reliable facts of my life. I wasn't going to become someone who announced themselves at Thanksgiving dinners. That's not who I am. But I could stop making it so easy to be overlooked. I could answer the question that wasn't asked. I could say, plainly and without apology, "Actually, I've been doing this for 11 years, and here's what I know. It's not bragging. It's just being present. Taking up the space that's already yours. My brother and I talk more now. Not every week, but regularly, more than we ever did before that Thanksgiving. He sends me things to look at sometimes, deals or questions about the logistics space, and I tell him what I think. He started asking better questions. I've started giving longer answers. Last month, he called to tell me the startup had addressed most of the issues in my memo. The founders had been defensive at first, he said, then thoughtful, then genuinely engaged. They'd brought on an industry advisor with actual enterprise sales experience. They'd revised their timeline. You might have saved me from a bad investment, he said. Or I helped you turn a risky one into a better one, I said. Either way, I agreed. He was quiet for a second. Hey, Mom's birthday is in March. Are you coming? Planning on it? Good. A pause. I'll actually talk to you this time, instead of just talking at me. I was going to say talking around you. But sure, I smiled. He couldn't see it, but I think he knew. See you in March, I said. I've thought a lot about why I stayed quiet for so long. Not just at Thanksgiving dinners, not just when Elliot was talking, but in general. In meetings where I knew more than the person leading them. In conversations where I had the answer and chose not to give it, I used to tell myself it was discipline, restraint, that I didn't need the validation. Some of that was true, but some of it, and I can see this clearly now in a way I couldn't before, was something less noble. It was easier. Silence is easy. It costs nothing in the moment. You never say the wrong thing. Never come across as arrogant. Never have to watch someone's face rearrange itself because you said something they weren't expecting. Staying quiet felt safe, and I mistook safety for wisdom for a very long time. What Harriet understood, what she's always understood, is that there's a difference between humility and invisibility. Humility is knowing your limitations honestly. Invisibility is letting other people define you because you never show them who you actually were. They look like the same thing from the outside. They're not. One is a choice made from strength. The other is a habit formed from avoiding discomfort. Elliot wasn't a bad person. He still isn't. He's someone who was handed a story early, the smart one, the ambitious one, the one who mattered. And he told that story so many times to so many people that he stopped checking whether it was still accurate. That's not malice. That's just what happens when nobody pushes back. And nobody pushed back on Elliot because it was always easier not to, including me. Here's what I've come to believe. The things we let slide accumulate. Every time I nodded through a toast where he'd gotten something wrong about my career, every time I said logistics mostly and changed the subject, every time I let him talk about finance like it was the only serious work in the world, I was making a small choice. Individually, none of those choices mattered. Together, over 11 years, they built a version of me that even my own brother didn't recognize. The cause of that Thanksgiving table going silent wasn't Harriet's question. Not really. The cause was 11 years of me choosing not to correct the record. What she did was just create the conditions for the truth to surface. Truth that was already there, waiting. The consequence landed so hard precisely because it had been delayed so long. That's what I think about now when I'm tempted to let something slide. Not the moment itself. The moment is always small, always easy to dismiss. I think about what the moment becomes when you multiply it by 100. When you look up one day and the gap between who you are and who the people around you think you are has grown so wide that closing it requires a scene at Thanksgiving dinner. I don't want that gap anymore. I don't think I earned the right to complain about being underestimated while actively making myself easier to underestimate. That's on me. It always was. Elliot and I are better now. Not perfect. We're still learning a new way to talk to each other, and old habits don't disappear just because you've named them. But we're trying. That counts for something. The work between people is slow, and it's not always clean. And the most honest thing I can say is that I'm glad Harriet asked the question she asked, and I'm glad I finally answered it. I'm also glad I stayed for the dishes,